and City of Virginia Beach.
Present.
And with that, we do have a quorum today.
Oh, thank heavens. I was afraid we were going to have to defer the minutes again.
Yeah, at the same time, we're not gonna do the agenda. We're not gonna say the people that are in attendance today, other than William Harrell and Mr. Connor, inside the, South Side, boardroom, to save some time for, the rest of our presentations. We will note everybody who's in attendance, though.
Thank you, Ms. Brenda. We actually have 3 sets of minutes to adopt due to lack of a quorum at the last meeting. I will be happy to entertain these as one block or individually. Are there any changes or any alterations or admissions? I'll entertain a motion.
So moved. Second.
Moved and seconded. All in favor?
Aye.
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 That's the easy one. Thank you, Carl. With that, we'll move to Mr. Burns and the January 2025 financial report.
Good afternoon, everyone. Today, we're presenting the draft preliminary year-to-date ending January 2025 financials. This is a 7-month snapshot, a little over halfway of the year. We are pleased with where we are landing on a year-to-date. I mentioned each meeting that I get neither excited nor concerned over a 1-month or really over a 2-month view. I look over trimesters and quarters and certainly for year-to-date, and we're in a healthy position for year-end. So as a draft consolidated statement into January 31st, 2025, the RTS revenue and the expenses are presented inside the statement of operations, and they're part of the approved budget. We then separate the RTS revenues and expenses and list them on page 3. And page 3 is for presentation purposes. Any financial impact is reflected here on page 2. So looking at the bottom line, very bottom line, reading from left to right, under the first highlighted column, we have a month-to-date positive variance to the budget of $132,500. Staying on that bottom line, to the second highlighted column, we have a year-to-date positive variance to the budget of $733,400. The crosswalk and locality reconciliation slides addresses the variance in detail and includes any estimated service reliability credits if they're applicable to your city. So let's go up the upper left-hand corner. You see the operating revenues, which are the agency-generated revenues. Reading from left to right on the passenger fares. So on the first highlighted column, the agency-generated and fare box revenue, $687,800. One column over, we were $30,700 off of our projections. Now, we had a lot of discussion on that last month regarding projections versus actuals. I will share that the year-to-date actuals are higher than last year actuals. So we are below on our projections for about 3% for the year. Staying with me on that top line to the second highlighted column, you'll see that the top line, the agency has generated $4,984,700 in fare box revenue. We're $151,700 below projections for the year, or about 3%. One column, on the same column on the right-hand side, one line down, we have RTS separated as a separate column, and that's $476,500. And as I mentioned, we had a lot of discussion and we discussed those in detail last month. Back over on the left-hand side, on the third line down, you'll see advertising revenue. Follow with me on that line down over on advertising to the first highlighted column. You'll see that the month-to-date revenue is $88,000, and we're back on track. I had some conversations with Alexis, and so we are back on track for the month. And if you stay with me on that line to the second highlighted column, we've generated $496,400 in advertising revenue, and we are above budget year-to-date too by about 6.4%. Coming back over on the left-hand side, you'll see the non-operating revenue, and that one line just below that is our federal funding. So if you follow with me over to the first highlighted column on federal funding, you'll see the 4.4. Go one to the left. You'll see that we budget each month, we've straight lined that this year, at $3,663,000. Now, under that highlighted column, the agency drew down $4,483,700, $820,007 above our intended projections for the month, and that was to cover any the eligible expenses. Stand with me on that second highlighted column. The year-to-date operating monies, actual year-to-date of $25,513,900 on a budget of $26,938,000. We are $1,416,900 below our projections, which is a positive reflection. We have, I'm looking over at Andrea now, that Andrea knew this, those monies, if we don't utilize those monies, we're able to use them in the future. Hey. Hi. Oh, sorry, mate. It's a grand entrance here. So back over on the left-hand side, you'll see under federal funding, you see HRRTF funding. This is the Regional Transit Service. This is a statement in the operations that reflects the level of services come online. We also, on page 3, as I mentioned, we have the revenue expenses separated, and these are part of the approved budget. Staying on the left-hand side, you see the state. That reflects the budgeted, or pardon me, that reflects both the budgeted and the drawn amount. If you look down on the local funding, we reflect this in an accrued amount, and any service reliability credit is included in the positive variance to date, if it's applicable. I also have it reflected on the enhanced crosswalk and the cost allocation slide for each city. So looking down the middle of the page on total revenue, on the first highlighted column, we have a month-to-date agency, all revenue generated of $12,707,400. Staying with me on that line, over to the second highlighted column, the agency has generated in revenue for the year-to-date $82,139,500. One column over, we're $2,679,000 below our projections for the year. 1.4 of that is the federal funding. 947,000 is RTS services that have not come online. So let's look at some expenses. So if we look at the second line from the bottom, these are expenses that are associated with the agency, and they were reflected as such. Reading from left to right on the first highlighted column, the month-to-date expenses were $12,574,900, and it was $657,500 above our budgeted projections for the month. Staying with me, as I mentioned, I never get too concerned, and I'm going to walk through some of those expenses that impacted that number for the month. Staying with me on the second highlighted column, you'll see that the agency has generated in expenses year-to-date of $81,406,100. One column over, the agency year-to-date is $3,412,400 below budget. I mention each month that we do a forensic on any items, and then we certainly talk about internal. There are a couple of items here. Adrian, I'm gonna pull you up. Come on up here. Let Adrian, you walk us through. So the first line item that was over budget for the month that I'd like to address for this month, look over on the expenses on personnel services. You can see that we had a expense of $7.689 million on a budget of $7.6 million. That is $682,000 above our numbers. We did a forensic over it for this week, and essentially it is the vacation buyback.
Sorry about that. It's vacation and holiday pay as well.
And I believe you did some research on the last 3 years. This is typically a normal pattern for what we've done.
Yes, for the last 3 years, going all the way back to January of 2022, we are over in this category every year
And is it
since.
the equivalent about that much too, about 9.7 or so?
Yes, and it is vacation and holiday pay.
All right, super, thank you.
You're welcome.
Now, so staying with me on that personnel services over the second highlighted column, we have personnel expenses of $50,074,000 on a budget of $50,592,000. So we're 517 below budget in that line item category, which is about 1%. So technically, we're comfortable with this. It's not where it's always been. It usually hangs around 2. And so, again, not terribly concerned over any of this. The second item I'd like to address is the purchase transportation. As I've stated almost every month this month, that this is a category that we are watching. And that it was a budgetary number that was explained last month of the manner in which we budgeted versus the level of performance that we're getting this year the level of performance has been exceptional, all right, which has affected the numbers a little bit. For this month, however, it did come essentially on budget, about $9,500 above the numbers for the month. So, however, we're going to continue to watch this, and I like expressing that. So on that purchase transportation, you'll see that we have expended $11,824,900. We're $442,800, about 3.9% over budget for that category. If we have any action to take moving forward, we'll certainly do so. At this time, we're just going to watch. Nothing else extraordinary inside our expenses for the month. There are 2 notes at the bottom of review for your review. So if we can go to page 3. Page 3 is we then separated the RTS revenues and we reflect the level of service that provided. These notes are part of the approved operating budget. They include the 757 and 15-minute service. If there was anything extraordinary, I would report that here. There was nothing extraordinary to report for this month. Next page. So this is our charts. So this is a reflection in a per month view. The revenue and the expenses read the same in that the blue is the budgeted per month, the green is the actual per month, and gray is last year to lend some perspective and comparison. We normally don't want to focus on these. We won't focus on the expenses, but with the projections on the fare box being down, do take a look at that top line. You'll see that the green has exceeded that gray. We are exceeding those budgets. So for terms of our actual revenue. Next page. So this is our crosswalk. This reflects the revenues and expenses associated between the localities and the agency. That bottom right-hand number of $733,400 matches the consolidated statement of operations. If you go 3 columns over, you'll see a budget status to date, and we're going to see that number on the next slide. There's 2 notes here on this page for your review. Next page, Mr. Jameer. So this page here, page 6, is the locality reconciliation via the cost allocation agreement. Up in the center of the page, the annual budget is the first column on the left in blue. 1 column over, you'll see the year-to-date budget status as of January the 31st. We trend this to the statement and to the crosswalk. On the locality operating share, the service reliability plan credit, if it's applicable, will be displayed here for your city. So we can go over. So let's look at right here on the total locality on page 6. The locality budget status today is $467,400. If you follow with me on the local fare box on that variance slide, you'll see that we're below projections of $158,300. It's specific to one city that we've had a lot of conversation with Norfolk. We were at minus 112 last month. I do track that, these last couple of months to see how we're trending. It's just one city. It's Norfolk on our projections, essentially. Next page, Chesapeake. Right, so the budget status to date for Chesapeake is $77,200. If you scroll up on that variance thing, you'll see that we had a positive fare box of $17,100. To give you an idea, Andrea, where we were last month, we were a positive 14,000. So we had an over increase we had a positive fare box contribution for that. And the balance of that is the service reliability credit that would be applicable to Chesapeake. Hampton, we had a locality budget status to date of $69,600. That's a positive fare box of $69,600. All services coming online up on the north side. So no service reliability credit. However, Hampton, Brian, last month it was $54,008, right? So we did have a positive on that as well, a positive reflection of ridership. Newport News, we had a locality budget status to date of $77,400. Again, no service reliability credit, so we receive a positive fare box of $77,400. And last month, the fare box was $64,100. So a positive bump upbeat there too. Norfolk, and John, so we're watching this, and I know we've had a lot of conversations with you. We have a locality budget status to date of a positive 193,000. Now, this is kicking in because of the service reliability credit and strategic allocation. This is allowing a positive variance back to Norfolk. Scrolling up on there, we're down $338,400 off of our projections. Last month, we were below projections by 276. So it's about a $50,000 below for this month as well. So Portsmouth, we have a locality budget status today.
Connor,
Yes, sir.
I'm sorry, before you move forward, I have a question.
Yes, sir. We probably get Ray up here.
One of the notes that we made back in December was regard to showing the baseball events, and I know we're not there yet per
Yes, sir.
se, but this banana.
Yes, sir. That was an action item that I was going to address. We got it to it. We were,
Okay,
the next event that we have, this free fair, we're going to list that up there for Norfolk.
okay. Yeah, starts the end of next
And,
month.
yes, sir. And then I think we could just do that for any city if we have any type of special event. So for Portsmouth, we have a locality budget status to date of $14,500. We have a local fare box positive variance of $8,100. Actually, Portsmouth had a little bit of a drop too. Last month, they were a positive 12,000 on their local fare box variance. In Virginia Beach, we have a locality budget status to date of $35,700 with a positive fare box of $7,900. Last month, it was $18,004, so it was a little bit of a drop this month as well. We do see that the service reliability credits did kick in for Virginia Beach, landing on that positive $35,700. Mr. Chair, that concludes my financial report.
Thank you. Are there any questions? Can you just remind me, and this, since nobody else is asking this question, it's probably just my clarification. So do we make adjustments for vacancies in the personnel line item? Is that why we're essentially within budget, even though we have a lot of vacancies?
I'll let Angela.
Basically, do we budget for attrition?
Yes, we do a budget for attrition.
All right, thank you. All right.
But I think
With the help of you guys,
I
actually.
think your follow-up question is the attrition reflected in the monthly amount?
So is the,
In the budgeted monthly amount?
yes.
Okay.
Thank you. All right. Any other questions? Thank you. All right, next item is the FY26 preliminary operating budget presentation.
Yes, sir. And I'm going to kick off with Angela in just a second here. And again, we did a significant amount of work between January the 6th and today. And appreciate Angela and her staff for working on this class.
Thank you. Okay. For the presentation to get up there. Okay, so welcome Chair DePerfria and MFAC committee members. I really do appreciate the opportunity to review the fiscal year 2026 preliminary operating budget with you this afternoon. Okay, we're going to look at this little overview here. We're going to start off with the budget calendar. Then we're going to look at the revenue and expenses, transition to the non-union position count, the local contribution and TSPs, and then finally next steps. Next slide. Okay, so as you can see, we're halfway through the budget season. Today, I'll touch base with you here at MFAC and review the preliminary operating budget. This budget is still a work in progress. Final budgetary figures will be presented in May. Just wanted to put that out there. Next slide. One more. Thank you. Okay, so turning to the revenue. Starting off with operating revenue. Due to slow but steady ridership growth, fare box revenue is calculated at 10.5 million, which is an 8.4% increase over prior year. Estimates, of course, are based on fiscal year 26 ridership projections and a 16-month trended fare per rider data. A contract revenue of 3.1 million covers Elizabeth River Crossing related operating expenses. Auxiliary, which is essentially advertising revenue of 800,000, is currently level with prior year. Now, HRT is in the process of analyzing the rates that we charge for advertising. So in the final budget, this line item will likely increase as a result of the adjusted rates. So stay tuned for that. And finally, non-transportation revenue has doubled as compared to prior year from 60,000 to 120,000. So trend analysis over the past 4 years has revealed this line item consistently exceeds budgetary levels. So the fiscal year 26 budget is going to reflect that trend. Okay, next up is federal aid. So the total federal aid of 46.6 million includes 26.1 million in ARPA, which is American Rescue Plan Act funding, 19 million in traditional 5307, 5337 funding, and 1.5 million in 5310 funding. 5310 funding is brand new to the budget and is a pass-through grant from the federal government to DRPT. This grant is designated to enhance the mobility of seniors and individuals with disabilities. This, of course, is perfect timing considering our trends in third-party costs for paratransit. This is the first year HRT has applied for this grant, and we are working with DRPT to secure the funding, and we'll receive word on the award before the start of fiscal year 26. So we're really excited about this new revenue stream. The overall federal aid variance here, year over year, is 480,000 or 1% increase. Turning to Hampton Roads Regional Transit funding is projected at 12 million, which is an increase of 14.2% over prior year. This increase is attributed to the programmed implementation of regional service. State aid is estimated at 23.1 million, which is a $1.8 million decrease as compared to prior year. Final state assistance numbers will be available in the spring of 2025. And finally, local share operating of 52.9 million is a 5.2% increase over prior year. I did want to turn your attention to the pie chart there. So this pie chart displays the revenue sources and their associated percent of the total revenue budget. So just briefly, starting with operating revenue, it comprises 10% of the revenue budget, federal aid 32%, HRRTF funding 8%, state operating aid 15%, and local share operating 35%. Okay, next slide. Okay, so jumping into expenses, I'm going to review this slide at a high level, and we'll dig into the cost drivers on slides 7 through 9. So beginning with personnel services, we're showing an increase of 5.3%. Contract services, a decrease of 10%. Materials and supplies, a reduction of 8.2%. Utilities, an increase of 2.6%. Casualty and liability is remaining level with prior year. Purchase transportation is an increase of 11.2%. Miscellaneous expense is a decrease of 14.1%. So year over year change is 3.8 million, which is a 2.6% increase as compared to 2025. This is in line with the October 2024 CPIU, that's the Consumer Price Index, of 2.6%, and well below the transportation services CPIU of 8.2%. Again, I'd like to turn your attention to the pie chart, which displays expense by category and the associated percentage of the total expense budget. So starting with personnel services, it comprises 62% of the budget, contract services 9%, materials and supplies 9%, utilities 1%, casualty and liability 4%, purchase transportation 14%, and then miscellaneous 1%. Okay, the next slide. Okay, so starting with personnel, we're looking at a variance, an increase compared to prior year of 4.6 million. So first of all, the collective bargaining unit wage increase of 2 million contributes to that increase. We also have an estimated 1.1 million in merit-based increases for support staff, which is essential for the recruitment and retainage of our non-union employees. We're looking at a $1 million estimated increase in fringe benefit costs for health insurance and retirement. We do have additional non-union positions, all-in costs equating to $150,000. And we're going to look at position detail a little bit more on slides 11 and 12. Vacation buyback is estimated to increase $53,000 based on trended participation, and operator uniform and tool allowance estimated to increase $43,000. Okay. Turning to services, it looks like a decrease of 1.6 million as compared to 2025. Starting with risk and safety, the increased estimates in safety-related contracts of $95,000. Under human resources, refined contract value decrease of $91,000. Under security-related contract services in the operating budget decreased by $480,000. This decrease is a result of enhanced security costs picked up by regional funding to support growth in the program. Facilities, we have refined contract value decrease of $513,000. And technology, refined contract values lowered by $516,000. And we are still currently reviewing services. We're still performing cost-benefit analysis of in-house versus contracted services agency-wide. Just say it's still work in progress. Okay, the next slide. So turning to materials and supplies, we're looking at a decrease of $1.1 million compared to prior year. So an early fuel lock for diesel and gasoline reduced the budget year over year by $573,000. Oil and lubricant costs is estimated to decrease $47,000. Tire costs is set to decrease $275,000. $376,000 of bus maintenance costs tied to the expanding fleet was picked up by regional funding. Facility supplies increased by $105,000 to support the transition from contracted services to utilizing in-house staff. Utilities increased $40,000 as compared to prior year, and casualty and liability is level with prior year. Next slide. So here's purchase transportation. There is an increase in the preliminary budget of $2.1 million as compared to 2025. So starting with ferry, contractual escalation in fees, plus a cost increase tied to providing insurance for the new ferries amount to $145,000 year-over-year increase. And now turning to paratransit. Updated numbers reflect increased demand for paratransit services, coupled with a contracted rate increase. Fortunately, the new 5310 federal funding, once awarded, will absorb the bulk of the $2 million cost increase for paratransit services. And then finally, turning to miscellaneous expense, we're looking at a decrease of $293,000. So there's an agency-wide reduction in travel, training, and education. Will be limited to essential and mandatory education and training. Some mandatory costs do include requirements to maintain certifications and licensing, and of course mandated training and education to comply with DRPT and FTA standards. Okay, next slide. One more, thank you. Okay, so this is the position count table. It's rather robust, so I'm going to break it down for you a little bit. So beginning on the far left, we're going to look at department. So each position is categorized by department, and in a few instances by department and type. We also have 3 funding sources for our personnel, starting with operating funded positions. They are included in the personnel services category on slide 6. Project-funded positions are funded by grants. For instance, our transportation demand management grant, it was traffic, so we've now renamed that to Go Commute. We have a few grants in planning. one of which is the Unified Planning Work Program. And of course, there are positions funded under our capital improvement plan, funded through projects with grant funds. The third and final funding source is RTS program. These positions are funded by the RTS program and included in Chapter 6, Table 615 of the Transit Strategic Plan. So moving to the right with your attention on the blue headers, the first section labeled fiscal year 2025 position count, that displays our current position count in the existing budget. The middle section labeled fiscal year 2026 position additions and deletions details the changes affecting the FTE count. On the next slide, we'll touch on the ebb and flow of those positions. The third section labeled 2026 preliminary position count displays the current count in the preliminary budget. All totaled, we see a net increase of 4 positions. Okay, next slide. Okay, under engineering and facilities, we are adding 2 transit stop technician positions to support the Am I Clean initiative for transit stops and shelters. These positions are funded under the RTS program. Under finance, we are adding 1 senior staff accountant for project and grant support. This position is funded through the operating budget. In operations, we have reclassed 3 existing positions to safety. We've removed 1 position, and we are adding 2 transit security officers to provide an increased security presence at transit stops and centers. These positions are funded under the RTS program. Under safety, did increase by 3 due to the reclass of positions from operations. In the planning department, we removed 3 data collector positions from our FTE count by leveraging automatic passenger count, that's APC technology on our buses. So those positions were no longer needed. We removed 1 RTS program manager position and redistributed duties to existing staff. We're adding 2 full-time customer service representatives to the FTE count. These positions are funded through the operating budget. Under technology, we're adding 1 network software engineer, which is funded under the RTS program. And we're also adding 1 senior system administrator, which is funded through the operating budget. And both technology positions support the expanding technological needs of the agency. Okay, next slide. Okay, so as requested, the 2026 local contribution calculation was, it was calculated using the traditional cost allocation methodology as opposed to strategic allocation. So I'm going to break down here what is strategic allocation and how does it impact the localities for some of the newer people in the room that may not be aware. Strategic allocation provides HRT the ability to break from the traditional cost allocation formula and utilize federal and state dollars to keep year-over-year budgetary increases level for all localities, cover fare box shortfalls specific to the individual locality dollar for dollar, calculate credits for service hours which did not come online due to operator shortages, calculate fare box overage credits for localities exceeding fare box estimates. And of course, the ability to strategically allocate funds requires a resolution approved by all city councils. So HRT has utilized strategic allocation to increase the local contribution by a standard % over the past 5 years. So the return to a traditional methodology outlined in the cost allocation agreement introduces changes that I want to go over now. So at the bottom right of the table here, you're going to see an average increase of 5% for the local contribution. You'll note under the traditional allocation methodology, the increase varies between the localities. So some cities are below that average of 5 and some are above. Under traditional allocation, localities are billed based on estimated service and the associated cost and not across the board increase. Under traditional allocation, budgeted fare box estimates once realized, meaning as actuals begin to populate, as we saw in the presentation that Mr. Burns just gave, those will no longer result in fare box overage credits or fare box shortfall coverage as they do under strategic allocation. And any service variances to the TSP will no longer result in service reliability credits. And then finally, one of the biggest advantages under strategic allocation was a budget certainty for the localities with a return to the traditional allocation reconciliations, which we call true-ups, will be reintroduced at the conclusion of the fiscal year. Okay, and as reviewed concerning the fiscal year 2022 audit a few months ago, accumulated service credits will be used to offset local contributions in fiscal year 2026 and future years. I've included here a small chart on the bottom right, which details the potential net payout for each localities. And we're going to touch on these a little more detail when we look at the TSPs. I do want to remind everyone that the individual local contribution figures are subject to change now based on refinements made between now and the final budget. So for instance, any expense adjustments between the various modes may impact the local contribution figures. Revenue updates too will impact the localities. So while it is the goal of HRT to keep the overall local contribution at 5%, the individual cities may see minor changes leading up to the final budget. So I just wanted to just remind everybody now that we're back under traditional allocation that that is potential. Okay. Next slide. Okay, so here's the local summary. The table here displays a summary of the local preliminary TSPs. So starting left to right, we find the modal types listed. We have bus, light rail, ferry, and paratransit, followed by service hours by mode and associated costs for service. Next is estimated fare box, along with fare box recovery, which is the percent of expense covered by the fare box. On average, 8% of bus service is covered by fare box, 8% of light rail, 12% of ferry, and 4% of paratransit. 55% of bus cost is covered by federal and state aid, 35% of light rail, 66% of ferry, and 57% of paratransit. Lastly is the local funding and the average associated percentage contribution. So below that local total line, you'll see commission expense, which is evenly distributed to each of the 6 cities. Next is advanced capital contribution, our ACC, which is allocated to each city based on their relative share of service hours. Total local contribution, so this is the total owed by the locality for service, commission expense, and ACC. And then beneath that is the applied carry forward credits, which again is half of the accumulated credits from the fiscal year 2022 audit. Those are displayed here. And then finally, the net local contribution would be the local contribution after the applied carry forward credits. Okay, the next slide. So beginning with Chesapeake. For the city of Chesapeake, the preliminary TSP is carrying 66,069 total service hours. Bus fare box recovery is trending at 6%, which is 2% lower than the agency average. Chesapeake local contribution is $3.7 million. Factoring in the applied carry forward credits, the net local contribution is estimated at $3.3 million, which is a 5.5% increase over fiscal year 25. Next slide. So for the city of Hampton, the preliminary TSP is carrying 108,623 total service hours. Bus fare box recovery is trending at 7%, which is a 1% lower than agency average. Hampton local contribution is $5.7 million. Factoring in the applied carry forward credits, the net local contribution is estimated at $5.3 million, which is a 3.5% decrease as compared to 2025. Next slide. So turning to Newport News. So for the city of Newport News, the preliminary TSP is carrying 172,671 total service hours. Bus fare box recovery is trending at 8%, which is right in line with the agency average. Newport News local contribution is $8.8 million. Factoring in the applied carry forward credits, the net local contribution is estimated at $8.1 million, which is a 6.6% decrease as compared to 2025. Next slide. And one more. Thank you. So turning to Norfolk, For the city of Norfolk, the preliminary TSP is carrying 341,079 total service hours. Fare box recovery is trending at 9%, which is above the agency average. Norfolk local contribution is at 23.6 million. Factoring in the applied carry forward credits, the net local contribution is estimated at 21.8 million, which is a 3.1% decrease as compared to fiscal year 25. All right, next slide. So for the city of Portsmouth, the preliminary TSP carries 67,710 total service hours. Fare box recovery is trending at 4%, which is half of the agency average. And just to let you guys know, the low fare box recovery does directly impact the local contribution per bus. Portsmouth local contribution is at 3.9 million. Factoring in the applied carry forward credits, the net local contribution is estimated at 3.6 million, which is an 8.8% increase over 25. Next slide. So wrapping up with City of Virginia Beach, they're carrying in the TSP 175,851 total service hours. Bus fare box recovery is trending at 8%, which is right in line with the agency average. Virginia Beach local contribution is 9.2 million. Factoring in the applied carry forward credits, the net local contribution is estimated at 8.5 million, which is a 7% decrease as compared to 2025. Okay, next slide. One more. Okay, so just glancing at the budget calendar one more time, highlighting here that the final budget is due on May 1st for distribution to MFAC. The week of May 19th, we will move for adoption by commission. That concludes my presentation.
Thank you. Are there any questions? Lisa?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Going back to slide 5. Couple of questions. First of all, on the new grant funding, on the 5310, I understood you to say it's not been confirmed yet. And it would be confirmed sometime before the beginning of the fiscal year.
Yes.
So what's the plan if it doesn't come in?
Well, we would likely, because just in doing a comparison with the draft, I'll just let you know, just looking at the federal aid, so we were able to bring down the amount of traditional funding in the preliminary budget based on that 1.5 million. So it'd be a combination of either reintroducing another 1.5 in traditional or, any budgetary adjustments, because we are still working on the budget.
And if great answer. So we've got some levers as relates to
Yes.
the increased use of some federal funding. I will say that Dr. Smith and I had a very good discussion with state staff last week, and it sounds pretty certain. So we're very hopeful that that 1.5
Okay.
will come forward.
Always just need to plan for contingency.
Always. Thank you.
So, moving on, I need to have a great deal of clarification. So the RTS money is being brought in as revenue at $12 million.
Yes.
Okay,
And it changed from last.
yes.
Yes.
And I also need to go back to Farebox for a moment also.
Sure.
Throughout your presentation, there have been categories where it says there were reductions in expenses and moved to regional funding.
Yes.
I'm having a big disconnect there. If you're bringing in regional money to support operations, where are these reductions moving to?
Would you like me to speak? Okay. So for instance, and I would encourage everyone to look at the transit strategic plan. There is a section in there that has program costs. Security is one of those line items that we, because the security footprint is growing faster than the implementation of regional service, the regional nature of security enables HRT to recognize a portion of those contract services as RTS program or startup costs. And you'll be able to, if you do a compare and contrast with the 25 Chapter 6 and the 26 Chapter 6, you'll be able to see that there's an increase in the funding, the RTS program funding, an increase in 26.
That's not quite what I'm asking.
Okay.
So I've been a long advocate, and you've heard me say this through O&O and through MFAC, that we needed to make sure that the RTS dollars were covering all the operating expenses that was their fair share. And I understand the startup costs. I get that. That's not a problem. If the operating costs, for instance, just the bus maintenance cost tied to expanding fleet,
Mhm.
in your operating budget, you have that as an expense, right? But it says here that the expense is being reduced by $375,000.
Mhm.
You didn't reduce the RTS money by $375,000. Where are these expenses going?
Those are all also showing up under the RTS program.
Can't remove it because it just went to another column if you look at it that way. So we're trying to find where really, you'd have had to reduce your overall security budget by this amount to come up this way.
And we can certainly work to clarify that, but I think the goal of what you suggested, and we know you've been an advocate in
Yeah.
terms of contracts, wanting to make sure RTS picks up its appropriate
It's-
share. This is a significant step in that direction. I don't know that we
So.
are completely showing it
Yeah.
in the manner that's clear, but that was the goal here.
Right, so my question is, you don't have a separate budget for bus maintenance at $357,000 that you're not showing us? No, so.
We don't need that.
Do you
that-
see the disconnect? That
Well-
If you have, you have $100,000 worth of bus maintenance costs, and 35,000 of that is being covered by RTS. I would expect in your RTS money to have $35,000 coming in your revenue to cover that 35,000. The way this is written, it looks like the 35,000 is going someplace else. And I don't think that's.
Let me work to
Yeah, that's not the
clarify.
case. We could,
Okay.
it's not, that's not the case at all, because we've spent a lot of time over that. We can repair that, how it's worded there.
For my clarification, so when you're saying that you shifted it elsewhere, are you basically saying that you more or less increase the amount of RTS revenues that's going to offset the costs associated with that item that you're referring to?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
So the $2 million increase in RTS is covering all these negatives that you're showing?
In
Yeah,
essence.
that's exactly it.
Still remain the same between, like, if you look at the operating budget as a whole, that hasn't changed. The expense hasn't changed, the cost to provide security hasn't changed, it's just the funding source has changed. This reflects the expense went down. That's why, we want to make sure we fully understand. And when I look at this, it shows, it ties to 1.5 on the expense side on page, I'm missing a page number. Page 6, I'm sorry. It shows that 1.5, so that's the part that I'm having a hard time connecting as well.
Let me see if I can get some language together.
Yeah, and that
And
was the
make it
point
more
I was
clear.
attempting to make. Maybe we need to adjust how we are accounting for it, but
Right.
we have been more aggressive, and that's really the bottom line in
Mhm.
terms of
Yeah, but
of RTS.
to see the RTS revenue and the RTS expenses is making sure that they're covered budgetary. Because the way this is phrased right now,
Mhm.
it looks like you're taking $357,000 out of bus maintenance out of the budget and putting it someplace.
I
And
understand.
And I want to make sure that that's not how you want to represent.
Yeah, I think I need to rework that
Okay.
narrative to
All
get
right.
it back to you guys.
Okay.
The narrative, yeah, and not the numbers. We got it.
On the fare box, when we met in, January, very long discussion about how Norfolk was represented.
Right.
And the media fare change and how it was accounted. And is that change been reflected in here? Or is that still a work in progress?
That is a work in progress. My numbers, my fare per rider numbers for this budget were relatively low. So that gives me a little more confidence that this number, because you know how we're kind of seeing a little disconnect in the 2025 budget as far as the fare box versus actuals, you know, the budget versus actuals. But we are going to take one more look before the final budget and really look at how we're trending all the way up to, say, probably March, as far as how we're collecting in that fare per rider data and incorporating that new information into the estimates. So that number may change based on, you know, what we come up with there. Because it's, you know, the 16 months that I use were ended October. So I think by incorporating, you know, more year-to-date information as of March, we'll be able to see a better number. So that certainly could change.
I missed on page 7, you said that, the, unions included $2.2 million of the next phase of the collective bargaining agreement. And
Mhm.
how much for a merit increase?
The merit was 1.1.
And what percentage is
That's a
that?
4%.
4%.
Yes,
And it's merit-based, it's not general wage adjustment or salary
correct,
adjustment.
merit-based.
Okay. And then the big 2 items that I don't see on our agenda in the January meeting, we talked about having a presentation on the legal requirements of doing the credits, and have a legal opinion about that and a detailed analysis on how the credits would be applied.
Mr. Chair, certainly we can have Mr. Travers and I believe Mr. Burton may be on the line as well. We don't believe that there needs to be any amendment to the cost allocation. When you look back at our history since 1999, there've been numerous years where cities have said, hey, look, I'll take a check. In other instances, cities have said, hey, look, just use it as a credit for next year. We happen to utilize the term credit, but it's based on the audit. It clearly states it's a due to the city. So we don't believe that a amendment to the cost allocation is needed because we have a historical practice and we can give you the breakdown. Every city has done it a little differently. So this should be no different. Mr. Travers.
Sure. I echo everything Mr. Harold just said, and we're happy to get more detailed if you'd like. I don't want to steal any thunder. We have essentially paused this exercise as we are sussing through some various federal funding issues that I think everyone here is aware of, especially since the OMB memo, the 2513 memo, that paused, at least temporarily, all federal disbursements. There has been yeoman's work done with regards to this issue, and that may impact the strategy with regards to credits. I don't know if we want to get into that right now.
Yeah, we don't want to talk a lot about that, but we are looking at aggressive ways to try to make sure that those resources can come in-house. So, but that's kind of the extent of what we want to talk about at this point until we finalize that
So-
process.
What I would propose is let us get our arms wrapped around this federal funding issue, get a game plan together to communicate with MFAC and the commission. And if at that time you still want to have a discussion about any amendments to the cost allocation and why we don't believe, one, that's necessary, or two, prudent in this situation, happy to have that conversation.
We're all struggling with the federal. I mean, I don't know anybody who isn't. So, I mean, and considering it changes rapidly, it's just until there's more firm ground. But certainly the application of the credits, mathematically and accounting wise, we still need to have that in-depth discussion.
Yes, thought we were covering that under, yeah. Are we able to cover that under old business today? Or maybe review of action items?
That's what it's talking about?
Yeah. or do
Right,
we-
so I think Skip may have said it best. We can discuss this, but I think it may be best to wait after
Okay,
some of
Alright.
these federal, I think it may,
well, I think, yeah, I'm not sure that the request is really, how does the federal piece impact this? I think the request is, how is this working in the budget now?
I see, okay.
Yeah, and I thought we might be able to cover that under
Yeah,
action.
Yeah, we can do that.
It was two different issues. One,
Okay.
the legal issue that is on pause,
Sure,
but two, there's the accounting math that goes with it.
sure. You know what,
Cash
we did
flow, all of
this,
that,
we
yeah.
did this at audit and budget back, the last audit and budget meeting. We had an extensive discussion and presentation over that. Ms. Brenda, pull up Angela's, presentation. Do you know what page that's called? Where you had in the back, bottom right-hand corner, you had the service reliability credits out over 2 years? Down toward the end, let me find it here for you.
It's on, you're talking about the presentation we just gave. right?
No, we understand that the request is to have $4.3 million of the local share that otherwise the localities would have to pay cash for. And it's on page 11, 14. We understand that. We had this discussion last month, and it still remains unclear to us how that actually works, both in an accounting practice and in a practical application of the dollars.
Bit more, because again, this isn't new ground. So, I mean, how was it handled before?
So, and this came up back in December when Chairman Gray at the time of the audit and budget brought it up, was from a basic cash flow management. This is cash that you're not receiving. How do we're never gonna see that money again. Because, and as Skip moved, had mentioned at that meeting, we were talking about the cost allocation, and if it speaks to it and whatnot, said this is different. We spent the money. The cost, those dollars are no longer there. It's not like in the past where if Hampton had asked to apply it to a future year, that was not a problem because that cash was still sitting with you. In this case, we just had an increased cost per hour that was not run through from a cost allocation. We spent that money based on that conversation. So still trying to understand is how we will manage this $4 million. $4.2 million I mean, how do you ever relieve the line of credit? It's what we've been asking for since then. To get that up.
Okay, thank you. That was helpful. So let us come back. Obviously, we would not have proposed it if we didn't believe we could handle that. I will say the ground is moving under us with the federal stuff going on. So that's why, as Mr. Travers mentioned, we've kind of put that a bit on hold to make sure we have a strategic effort to try to secure those dollars that are out there. So if you all would just be patient with us a bit to allow us to focus on that, which is a big, big item for us, then, we certainly can come forward with, how we intend to manage the cash flow requirements if in fact the credits are done as we have suggested. Is that?
So, 'cause I know we're already in February, it's crazy to believe, and May, we're gonna go for the adoption, right? In March, at the next meeting, can we have this presentation? Because it's a key piece for this budget.
We'll have something for you. It's not and I can, from my 35 years of cash management work, 4 million over 365 days is $11,000 bump. It can be absorbed. We'll have a presentation for you in March.
I think the concern is, where is that cash going to come from?
I can show you
You
that.
can't drawing down on for the same expenditure from multiple sources, obviously we can't do that. So trying to understand that piece.
I can show you that.
How do you apply the credit and still receive the money assigned to that cost?
And fundamentally, the way we're looking at this is if your budget comes in 100% at revenue or under, and you have 100% of expenditures, you're going to be automatically short $4.2 million, the way this is set up. So that's where our concern is.
Understand.
Okay.
Let us come back next month. Gotcha.
Just looking at it from the lens of if my budget acts exactly as it's been planned, that you get 100% of your revenues and you spend 100% of your expenses, you're automatically short $4.2 million. If your revenues go less, then you have to have even more savings on the expenditure side. So that's the lens that we're looking at it from.
Clarification will help us fine tune our presentation. We believe we have a solid plan. So we'll bring that next month, Mr. Chair.
Okay, thank you. So we'll bring that in March. All right.
Mr.
Yeah.
Chair, we normally get a line item detail that we can complete our questions, and then we'll circulate those within the next week or so.
I'll get that out to you.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. All right. Is there anything else relative to the 2026 preliminary budget? Constantinos?
Yeah, I still had some questions, and part of it's kind of tied to what Lisa just asked. But with the increased cost noted here for the health insurance and retirement costs, the $1 million, can you provide us a year-to-date budget versus actual for those line items? Because I know in the past we've talked about that there was accruing some savings there. So to better understand that.
Sure, let me make that note.
Also, could you remind me, when did the future rate for diesel get locked in at the $2.59 and the $2.31 respectively for gasoline?
I locked that in back in November, December. I always go right before the holidays, and what I did was I blended it for this year and next year. So we're having it for the next 18 months for this year. So whatever that number is, 259 today, 261, whatever it is what we blended it. I went forward on a good bit of futures. Way long, twice, right? And then so we could get this money in. We'll get that budget number.
And the last question I had was, and it might be just the language we're using, but the traditional allocation, if hours did not come on for whatever the reason, that would be calculated as part of the true up, as we call it, right? Their locality's cost would go down because they didn't have service. I just want to make sure that's still happening, like if Norfolk does not have, or anybody who's not able to provide the service that the TSP called for because of the operator shortage or for whatever reason, that they're still getting that adjustment specific to them.
Yes, you're talking about it when we're going back to the cost allocation, the traditional methodology.
Right, I just,
Yes, yes, you would not pay for service hours that didn't come online in your locality. But of course, the other side of it is your cost per hour overall goes up
mhm.
because we have fewer service hours, we have fewer service hours that are
Okay,
coming in and that cost per hour increases. So,
that makes sense.
yeah.
Okay. Yep, thank you. Any other questions? I have one, and this kind of goes back to the question I had asked in the financial report. What's the amount of savings that we have essentially built into the 26 budget associated with sort of accounting for the vacancies?
I should have had that ready. I have it in a spreadsheet somewhere, but I'll actually add that when I send out
Okay.
the line item variance and Constantina's questions, I'll add that. in
Great,
there.
thanks. And then based on the percentage that you're assuming the vacancies to be.
Yes, sir.
Awesome, thank you. All right, are there any other questions? Taking a look at the Zoom because I usually forget to look at them. It looks like they're. Okay, so we're on to old business. We have quarterly staff updates. That next one is programmed for April. And then the quarterly grant projects updates programmed for March. And then we have the financial audit update.
Yes, sir. So you know, my accounting staff and I meet twice a week with our external auditors, and that we are online to present in March, to have the financial audit for fiscal year 2023 completed by March. As of this writing, we expect another unmodified opinion, and I believe they're going to have, as of this writing, they have one finding.
Thank you. Are there any questions on the audit update? All right, thank you. Moving right along. The next is new business. We have free fare update, Transit Equity Day.
Mr. Amoruso.
Good afternoon. I believe this was included in the meeting invite, so it's pretty self-explanatory. You can see February 10th, 2025, which was Monday, just like last year. By mode, what the ridership was, just slightly different by 2,000 boardings overall. Majority of the boarding difference was in the mode of bus. And then I included FY 20, or calendar year 23, which just for a point of reference, which was lower, it was a Friday, so different days have different characteristics. If you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer them.
Are there any questions? All right, thank you, Ray. Next item is the line of credit loan closing. It's my understanding that this has already gone through the rest of the commission, and so this is just an update, and it's already been approved. So it's just kind of an update for MFAC as to how that process worked. I think it went through O&O and then the commission back in
Yes,
the
sir.
fall. So,
Yes, sir.
Thank
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This was a courtesy reminder to the commission, is a resolution coming for this week. It is exactly like it was last year. As you know, so this is just a courtesy to the commission that this is in fact a closing of a loan and opening of a loan. It's a governance authority that Mr. Harrell and the treasurer, which is myself, act upon. Just like you said, we went through a procurement and we selected Town Bank, and we had extensive discussion in operations and oversight that included most of the terms and conditions, which actually were better than every contract we've ever done. And so with that said, we selected the bank, and it's Town Bank, and we did a 3-year contract with 2 one-year renewals with locked-in rates for those 5 years, with my option, all right, to re-enter anything new that if I choose. So this is just a formality of notifying the commission that we're closing the loan as of commission day.
Thank you. Are there any questions? Constantinos?
How much is the line of credit, the total, I guess, the max amount allowed on the line?
17.
Thank you.
Any other questions? All right, next is federal grant update.
Yes, sir. So Dr. Travers mentioned a few things of this. Come on up, Skip, and Lisa, I loved your words here, and we use these exactly the same until we're on more firm ground. So we did want to list this agenda item as a result of the OMB 2513 regarding federal grants for the entire country. And as a result, the moment that came out, William Harrell called me and said, we want a review of all of our federal and operating and capital grants. So we assembled a team, right, of the folks that are most knowledgeable regarding finance and grants and started reviewing some things. So this exercise today was just as a communication to the commission as a proactive approach to this executive order and a courtesy communication to the conversation. Knowing you guys utilize federal funds, you guys just said it best. There is no communication whatsoever. Skip alluded, there's so many unknown variables, a lot of options that we are reviewing internally. That includes drawing down some of these federal funds ahead of schedule, right? And reallocating these funding sources with the goal in mind of preserving these funds for future budgetary years. That is the goal. And to date, we have reached out to all of our oversight agencies, right? That includes our external auditors. And Skip used the word yeoman's work. It was yeoman's work times 2. We reached out to our external auditors with extensive discussion, the state of Virginia and the FTA. And so to let us bring some clarity, to what type of execution and strategy we're going to have in preserving these funds. Lots of avenues, before we're executing any strategy. And that's really essentially what I have for today, sir.
Thank you. There anything to add? Any
Do-
questions?
Do we have just a ballpark, what we're talking about? 100 million, 200 million?
We prefer not to get into those details, but we promise to come forward with that.
We
Okay.
have to report to our city council what those
Okay.
numbers are, so.
Okay.
Because if HRT or any of our partners start to lose federal money, then the look will be to the localities. So we are also looking at our future potential liabilities for at least the request for assistance from our partners. And it would be very helpful to know, so.
Thank you. And Hampton's done the same thing. We briefed our council on the impacts. I think at our last council meeting, we were kind of going through, as we go through our budget process, sort of, game plans for how we deal with that issue if we do have additional impacts from the federal government. Thank you. There are no other questions on the federal grant update. We've got review of action items.
Ms. Brenda, can you pull those up? 2 of those have been addressed already. Actually, all 3. John, you mentioned us putting a footnote down. And, we'll start that next month. We'll add that. And I'll put the numbers on there for you too, for all free fair days regarding Norfolk and anyone else. So that's that first action item. That is, so that was the Savannah Banana. The second was regarding the amendment regarding the standard cost allocation that Skip discussed here just a moment ago. And that third, I believe, Constantinos, we really don't know what that meant. No one understood that. But I think you clarified it today.
Right. So we'll come back on item number 3 next month in March. So, all right. Are there any other questions about the action items? All All right, are there any other items for the good of the meeting? If not, then I declare us adjourned. Thank you.